Imagine standing at the edge of society, looking out at a world that's both deeply familiar and yet completely unknown. There's a whole other way of life that most of us don't see, and it thrives just outside the boundaries of the mainstream. This is a life where people live beyond the constraints of modern norms, a life on the fringes of society, in communities often carved out in remote forests, mountains, deserts, or wherever they can find a space to call their own. It's not just a geographic boundary, it's a psychological one. These are people who've either been pushed out by circumstance or who have consciously chosen to step away, to live outside the comfort zones of modern life. They live by different rules and values, unburdened by the constant pressures of consumer culture or societal expectations. It's a wild, challenging existence, and yet there's something undeniably magnetic about it. Now, who are these people who live out there on the edges? You might be tempted to picture them as outcasts or rebels, and while there's a kernel of truth to that, it's a much deeper, more complex mosaic. Some of them are survivalists, prepping for a world they fear is coming, honing the skills they'll need if everything else collapses. Others are free spirits, artists, musicians, wanderers who reject the grind of the 9 to 5, seeking something raw and real in the untamed places. And then there are those who turn away from society not out of anger or fear, but out of a deep, almost spiritual calling. They're looking for a connection to the land, to the way people used to live before we built cities, before technology took over, before the rush and clutter and noise. They seek silence, they seek peace, and they seek the kind of solitude that lets them connect with something greater than themselves. Think about it. What does it take to live this way, to leave everything behind? It's easy to romanticize the idea of living off the grid, but the reality is not for the faint of heart. It's hard, often lonely, sometimes dangerous. There are no safety nets, no conveniences, no guarantees. These people face real physical challenges: hunting, gathering, building shelter, and learning to live in harmony with a sometimes unforgiving environment. There's no corner store for a quick snack or a mechanic when something breaks down. These are folks who have learned how to fix things with their hands, to grow their own food, to find water in places most of us wouldn't even think to look. It's a constant battle against the elements, and it requires a level of resilience and toughness that we can hardly imagine in our comfort-driven society. But here's what's fascinating. Many of them would never go back. They see their lives not as a series of sacrifices, but as an act of liberation. Out here, they're free from the rules and demands of a system they feel no longer serves them. They are no longer defined by a job title, a salary, or a social status. Their worth isn't measured by how many possessions they own, but by how well they can live with less. They tell stories of waking up each morning with a sense of purpose and clarity that they never found in the cities, of learning to tune into the rhythms of nature, to follow the cycles of the sun and the seasons, to truly understand what it means to live a full day. Out here, they experience moments of profound peace, of watching a sunrise over a mountain range, or sitting by a fire with nothing but the sound of crickets and a star-filled sky for company. It's a life stripped down to its essence, a life without distraction, without noise. Yet, there's a paradox to this way of living. On one hand, it's isolating. They are removed from the world, cut off from the conveniences and connections we take for granted. But on the other hand, it creates a kind of community that's rarely found in our crowded, bustling cities. Out there in these small, close-knit groups, people learn to rely on each other in ways that go beyond mere friendship. They share resources, they help each other build homes, they teach each other skills. They're bound together not just by choice, but by necessity, by a shared commitment to survival and a shared rejection of the path most of us walk. They form bonds that are rooted in trust and a kind of mutual respect that grows when people face the raw reality of life together. They aren't alone. They've created a family of sorts, a network that supports and strengthens them, even if it looks nothing like the communities most of us are used to. So why do people choose to live this way? Some say they feel disconnected in a world driven by consumption and technology. They feel the emptiness of a culture that pushes material success as the ultimate goal but leaves people feeling isolated, burnt out, and craving something real. For these people, stepping out of society is a way of reclaiming their lives, of finding meaning and purpose beyond the superficial. It's a journey inward as much as it's a journey outward. They're not just searching for a new way to live. They're searching for a new way to be, a way to align themselves with their values, to find peace and simplicity, to break free from the structures that tell us who we are and what we should want. But here's the real kicker. They don't see themselves as running away. They see it as returning to a more honest, primal existence, to a way of life that humans have known for thousands of years, but that we've all but forgotten. They see their lives as a reminder that there's more than one way to live, that happiness doesn't have to be tied to success or status or stuff. They are finding fulfillment in simplicity, in self-reliance, and connecting with the land in ways that many of us will never experience. They're proving that it's possible to step away from the noise, to carve out a life that's meaningful on their own terms. This is a world that invites us to question everything. What are we missing in our own lives? What have we sacrificed in the name of progress? These people have left behind a society that tells them what to believe, what to want, who to be, and in doing so, they've found a freedom and clarity that can't be bought. They've reminded us that sometimes to find what's real, you have to let go of everything else. It's not an easy life. It's not a safe life, but it is undeniably a life lived fully. Let's dig into why people make this choice to step away from what most of us would consider a normal life and instead go off the beaten path. You know, it's easy to dismiss it as something extreme or even rebellious, but when you really talk to people who've made this decision, you start to understand it's rooted in something incredibly profound, almost primal. See, there's a growing feeling in our society, a sort of collective discontent. People feel trapped, disconnected from themselves and from the world around them, even though we're more connected than ever before. They talk about feeling suffocated by the constant noise, the news, the notifications, the never-ending list of things we're supposed to do, to buy, to achieve. For a lot of people, the modern world starts to feel like this hamster wheel that you can't get off of, a cycle of constant striving with no real satisfaction. It's funny because, in a way, we're living in one of the most comfortable eras in human history. We've got technology that can deliver us food, help us avoid any physical discomfort, provide entertainment at our fingertips 24/7. But at the same time, all this comfort has created a kind of mental and emotional numbness. We're constantly chasing the next thing, always moving, always striving. Yet people feel more isolated than ever, more stressed, more anxious, and ironically, lonelier. So some people start asking themselves the big questions. What if there's more to life than this endless pursuit? What if we're missing something fundamental by being so comfortable, so safe, so attached to our screens and our routines? What if, by trying to avoid discomfort, we've accidentally cut ourselves off from something raw and essential? That's where this idea of stepping away becomes so powerful. It's not just about rejecting the modern world. It's about reclaiming something that feels more human, more real. People are drawn to the idea of living a life where they're physically connected to the land, where they can see the direct impact of their work, where their day is guided by the rising and setting of the sun instead of the glow of a phone screen. There's this pull, this yearning to get back to a life where you're not constantly distracted or overwhelmed. They want to experience life as it is, without the filters, without the noise. And sometimes that means getting out of the city, away from the routine, and into a place that forces them to rely on themselves in a way they never have before. And that journey isn't just about survival. It's about self-discovery. You start to learn things about yourself when you're removed from everything familiar, in the quiet, in the stillness, away from the buzz of daily life. You're forced to confront your own thoughts, your own fears, and your own potential. Out there, every day, brings a sense of accomplishment that's hard to replicate in the world most of us live in. Think about it. When was the last time you did something with your hands? Built something, grew something, or even just took the time to sit in silence and reflect on your life? These are things that for thousands of years were part of the human experience. Now, they're luxuries or hobbies for most people, but for those living on the fringes, they're necessities. And in those necessities, they find a deep, grounding sense of purpose. But it's not just about rediscovering old skills. It's about redefining freedom. Freedom is a funny concept because we talk about it all the time in our society, but how free are we really when you're tied to a job you hate because you need the paycheck? When you're bound to a routine that leaves you exhausted and stressed, when every waking hour is consumed by obligations, are you truly free? The people who choose this life believe that freedom isn't just about having choices. It's about having control over your own existence. Out there, they're free from the pressures of status, from the fear of judgment, from the need to conform. They're free to live by their own values, to define success in their own terms. And that's a kind of freedom that's hard to find in the city, in a society that constantly tells you who you should be and what you should want. Of course, there's a spiritual aspect to it, too. Many of the people who walk away from society aren't just looking for a break. They're looking for something sacred. They're drawn to nature not just as a place to live, but as a place to find peace, to connect with something larger than themselves. There's a humility that comes from living closely with nature, a recognition of our own smallness in the grand scheme of things. When you're out there under a vast sky surrounded by mountains or forests that have stood for thousands of years, you're reminded of how fleeting life is, how connected we all are, and how easily we forget that in our day lives. It brings a kind of clarity, a sense of wonder and awe that most of us only experience in brief moments, if at all. It's interesting, too, because the more disconnected we've become from nature, the more we seem to crave it. There's something healing about it. Scientists talk about it now, how nature can reduce stress, improve mood, even lower blood pressure. But these folks don't need a study to tell them that. They feel it every day. It's in the rhythm of their lives, in the way they work with the seasons, in the way they know the land, not as a resource to be exploited, but as a home, as a living, breathing thing. They're not just surviving out there. They're thriving in a way that many people in the modern world can't quite understand. They're learning to live with respect for the earth, to take only what they need, and to give back as much as they take. This choice to live on the edge, away from everything we're told we need to be happy. It's not for everyone. It's challenging, it's raw, and it's often uncomfortable. But for those who feel that deep need to escape, to reconnect, it's not a sacrifice, it's a liberation. It's a way of shedding the superficial and getting back to something real, something meaningful. It's a journey towards self-sufficiency, peace, and understanding, not just of the world around them, but of themselves. And in a society that's constantly pushing us to have more, to do more, to be more, maybe these people have found something that many of us are still searching for. Kind of quiet, grounded, unapologetic happiness. They remind us that there are other ways to live, other definitions of success, and that sometimes to truly find ourselves, we have to lose everything else. When we talk about living on the fringes of society, about stepping outside the comforts and conveniences that most of us take for granted, it's impossible not to acknowledge the very real challenges that come with that choice. And make no mistake, this life isn't easy. It's far from the romanticized vision of sitting by a campfire under the stars every night. Sure, there's beauty and peace in it, but there's also hardship, discomfort, and an unrelenting need to adapt to a world that doesn't come with a safety net. Out there, every day is a test of resilience. People face weather that can turn brutal, illnesses they have to treat without a doctor nearby, and the constant need to be resourceful. You break a tool, you don't run to the store, you figure out how to fix it, or you make do without it. If you run out of food, you can't just order takeout. There's no backup, no easy fix, and that reality demands a level of mental toughness, patience, and adaptability that most of us have never been forced to develop. But here's the thing. For those who choose this life, these challenges aren't deterrents. They're part of the appeal. There's a kind of satisfaction that comes from overcoming something difficult, from looking back at a tough day and knowing you got through it on your own terms, by your own effort. In a world where so much of our lives is automated or outsourced, where we've traded skill and know how for convenience, there's something undeniably powerful about reconnecting with those basic abilities. It's not about being a survivalist for the sake of it. It's about knowing that you can depend on yourself, that you have what it takes to thrive without the trappings of modern life. People who live this way, they know the value of every meal because they've grown it, caught it, or bartered for it. They understand the worth of a home because they've built it with their own hands. And these aren't just material things, they're symbols of independence, of autonomy, of a life where every small victory is earned. Now, I'm not saying everyone can or should live like this. It's a lifestyle that requires sacrifice, and not everyone is willing to give up the comforts of modern society. But there's a reason so many people are drawn to it, even if only in their imagination. This way of living offers a kind of clarity that's hard to find in a world filled with distractions. It strips life down to its essentials and forces you to confront what truly matters, what's truly necessary. In many ways, it's a return to something we've lost, a reminder that beneath all the technology and the noise, we're still animals at heart. We still need food, water, shelter, and connection, and when you strip away everything else, you start to see those needs in a new light. There's a profound sense of purpose in knowing that your survival is in your own hands, that your happiness is something you can build rather than something you bought. Of course, this life is also about community, about finding people who understand that same drive for independence, who share that same respect for the land and for each other. When you live out there, removed from the hustle and bustle, community takes on a whole new meaning. It's not just about knowing your neighbors or making small talk. It's about true interdependence, about people coming together, not out of obligation, but out of genuine need and mutual respect. In these fringe communities, people aren't divided by status or wealth. They're bound together by a shared commitment to this lifestyle, by the trust that comes from knowing you're in it together. When someone needs help, the community steps in, because out there, survival isn't just a personal endeavor, it's a collective one. These aren't just neighbors. They're people you rely on, people who become like family, because in many ways, they're all you have. But perhaps what's most fascinating about these communities is the way they redefine value. In mainstream society, we're taught that value comes from money, from possessions, from our ability to climb the social ladder. But out there, value is measured differently. It's not about how much you own. It's about what you can contribute. Your skills, your willingness to help, your respect for the land. These are the currencies that matter. And in that way, these communities are creating a new kind of wealth, one that can't be quantified, but is deeply felt. There's a kind of richness in simplicity, in knowing that your worth isn't tied to a number, but to your character, to what you bring to the table. And here's the thing. These people living on the fringes, they're not trying to make a statement or prove a point. They're not out there to be martyrs or to convince others to join them. They're simply living according to their values, pursuing a life that feels honest, that feels meaningful. For many of them, this isn't a rebellion. It's a refuge. It's a way to reclaim a sense of agency in a world that often feels overwhelming, a way to find peace in the quiet of nature rather than the chaos of modern life. They're not anti-society. They're not anti-society. They're pro-balance, pro-connection, pro-living in a way that honors their own needs and desires. So, yes, there are hardships. Yes, there's discomfort. But for these people, the rewards far outweigh the challenges. They find joy in the small things, in a warm fire, on a cold night, in the taste of food they've grown themselves, in the quiet satisfaction of a day's work well done. And maybe, just maybe, they're onto something that we've all been missing. A reminder that life doesn't have to be easy to be fulfilling, that happiness isn't about avoiding discomfort, but embracing it, learning from it, and ultimately finding strength and beauty in a life lived on your own terms. Let's bring it home by talking about what all of this actually means, not just for the people who live on the edges, but for all of us. In a way, the lives of these people serve as a mirror reflecting the questions that maybe we're all asking ourselves at some level. Why are we here? What are we chasing? And ultimately, what does it mean to live a life that's truly fulfilling? In our society, we're sold this idea that happiness lies in achievement and success, in gathering more and more wealth, more recognition, more comfort. But when you talk to people who've stepped away from all that, people who have chosen a simpler life on the outskirts, you realize they're living by a different set of rules. They've found meaning not in what they can accumulate, but in what they can experience, in what they can build with their own hands, in the relationships they foster, and in the quiet, often humble acts of day-to-day living. These folks remind us of something we've forgotten, that life doesn't have to be this nonstop pursuit. It doesn't have to be a race. They've stripped away the noise, the pressure, the endless demands, and in doing so, they've found a certain kind of freedom, one that many of us might not even know we're missing. They've made their lives about quality, not quantity, about depth, not breadth. They wake up each day with a sense of purpose that doesn't rely on external validation. It's about self-reliance, but it's also about humility. Out there, you can't control everything, and that forces you to be present, to live in the moment, to adapt to what comes your way. You learn to find joy in the here and now, instead of always looking toward what's next. And here's the incredible thing. In living this way, they're not just enriching their own lives. They're reminding all of us that we have choices, that we don't have to buy into a system that tells us what we need to be happy. It's easy to forget that in a world where everything is designed to pull us in, to keep us hooked, to keep us consuming and scrolling and striving. But these people, they're living proof that there's another way. They're showing us that you can define success on your own terms, that you can build a life that's about connection, about simplicity, about being in tune with the natural world. And that's powerful because it challenges the assumptions that so many of us have been raised with. So what's the lesson here? It's not necessarily that we all need to pack up and move to the woods, though there's no doubt we could all benefit from spending a little more time in nature. The lesson is about choice. It's about understanding that we don't have to live the way we're told to live, that we can step back, take a breath, and ask ourselves what really matters. These people on the fringes, they've made a choice to live a life that feels right for them, even if it looks strange or difficult to others. And in doing so, they've found something that many people with all the money and success in the world never find. A sense of peace, of contentment, of true satisfaction. Maybe the greatest takeaway here is the realization that fulfillment doesn't come from having it all. It comes from appreciating what you have. It's about knowing yourself well enough to understand what genuinely brings you joy, what truly feeds your soul. For some, that might mean pursuing big goals and dreams within the framework of modern society. But for others, it might mean taking a step back, slowing down, and reconnecting with a way of life that's rooted in authenticity and purpose, in simplicity. We don't all have to live on the fringes to understand that truth, but we can learn from those who do. They're like a reminder, kind of wisdom we've nearly forgotten in our fast-paced lives. At the end of the day, the people who live on the edges are showing us that there's more to life than what we're sold. They're living proof that happiness isn't found in abundance, but in presence, in being here, in knowing who you are and what you need, and in building a life that aligns with that. And maybe, just maybe, they're the lucky ones, the ones who've broken free from the noise and found a kind of clarity that most of us spend our whole lives searching for, because real freedom isn't just about having the ability to do whatever you want. It's about knowing what truly matters to you and having the courage to live by that truth, no matter where it takes you. As we wrap up this journey into the lives of those who have chosen a different path, a life outside the confines of what society tells us is normal, it's impossible not to feel both challenged and inspired. These stories aren't just tales of people living off the grid or choosing a simpler existence. They're invitations to question what we value, what we prioritize, and ultimately what we prioritize, and ultimately what it means to live a life that feels truly alive. There's something deeply inspiring about people who are willing to take such a bold leap, who have the courage to let go of what's comfortable and familiar in search of something more real, more grounded. Because in a way, that's what so many of us are seeking, right? A life that feels like it's truly ours. One where we're not just going through the motions, but actually connecting with the world and people around us. You see, when you step back and really think about it, these people aren't rejecting life. They're embracing it in the rawest, most profound way possible. They're saying, I want to know who I am without the noise, without the expectations, without the never-ending pursuit of more. And I think deep down that resonates with so many of us, because in our own ways, we're all looking for that same sense of clarity, of purpose, of freedom. We're all trying to figure out what truly brings us joy and what feels meaningful. And these people on the fringes, they're living proof that maybe the answers aren't as complicated as we think. Maybe they're not found in another promotion or a bigger house or a faster car. Maybe the answers are simpler. Maybe they're found in moments of stillness, in the quiet satisfaction of a day's hard work, in the bonds we build with the people who matter, and in the courage to live in a way that feels honest to who we really are. What's truly remarkable is that their choices remind us that life is about more than survival, more than just getting by. It's about thriving in ways that aren't measured by money or status. They're thriving because they've built lives that align with their values, with their sense of what's right, even if it's difficult or lonely or unconventional. And that's a powerful message for all of us, because at the end of the day, the way we live, the way we choose to spend our time, the people we surround ourselves with, that's what creates a life that feels worth living. And these people are showing us that we can live that life, that we don't have to accept the script we've been handed. So maybe the greatest takeaway here is a call to action, not necessarily to abandon everything and go off the grid, but to start looking within, to start listening to that quiet voice that tells us what we really want, who we really are. They remind us that it's okay to question, to step back, to take a different path if that's what feels right.
Remind us that at the end of the day, freedom is a choice and fulfillment is something we create, not something we're given.
It's about the courage to say, this is my life, and I'm going to live it on my terms. Because that's what they've done. They've carved out lives that are uniquely theirs, lives that reflect their values, their dreams, and their deepest sense of purpose. And maybe if we're willing to listen, to learn, to reflect, we can take a piece of that wisdom and bring it into our own lives. Maybe we can start to build lives that feel a little more connected, a little more meaningful, a little more true to who we are. Because in a world that's constantly pushing us to go faster, to do more, to be more, perhaps the real revolution is in slowing down, in simplifying, in choosing a life that's guided not by what we're told we need, but by what we know deep down makes us feel alive. So here's to those living on the edge, to those who've dared to seek a different path. And here's to all of us, to finding our own way, to creating lives that feel like they're truly ours, and to the freedom that comes from living a life that's honest, intentional, and full of purpose.